What is going on, Macro Perspective peeps? Oh man, we've got a great episode here with the Macro Pod. So if you're tuning in, our guest today, well, world-renowned Coach Greg McMillan. I really wanted to get Greg on the podcast today, guys, because I've used his programs and the running pace calculator. I went onto Google, put what are my paces? And his thing came up first, and it was amazing. And I have been using it for maybe the last 2 years. And Greg, I'll be honest with you, I just followed what it said on those paces when I had runs that said easy, moderate, hard pace. I just followed the numbers it gave me, and my half marathon times jumped that year. Our high rocks times, me and my fiance, jumped 23 minutes faster. So I definitely got to say the work on that calculator saved my saved my training really well. But you have a plethora, like your pedigree here is insane. Obviously, you have the educational background, like the masters and all this. You've ran your whole life. But I think a true master, and know Marcos knows this too, is a person that not only does it, but is able to do it at scale. And you've had over 10,000 people qualify for the Boston Marathon. Just listen to that again, guys. 10,000 for the Boston qualifiers. Had multiple Olympic game athletes, Pan American champs, national champions, and a plethora of different things. Greg, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad the calculator helped you.
It's there. You have such a pedigree of just amazing accomplishments and things like that. But we kind of like to highlight the person. A little bit of a journey. Tell us how you got into running, how you fell in love with this sport of running, right? And then what inspired you to go, you know what? I got to get these Boston qualifiers. I got to help people worldwide. How did that arc happen for you?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't planned. I think, like a lot of things in life, it just kind of unfolds. I grew up in rural Tennessee, so we were very active as children just because my best friend lived a mile away. So you got a lot of mileage in just playing. And then in school, that's when PE was really PE, and we did a lot of activities. And we had a countywide field day where if you were the top at your elementary school, you went and competed in the county, and I won the mile run. And of course, the high school coach, he just watches those meets and he says, well, that's my shot putter, that's my distance guy. So as I got to high school, naturally I started running and really fell in love with it then, and wanted to study everything I could to figure out how to make myself better. So it was a really selfish journey to start. So studied exercise science and ran, and continued to kind of delve into how could I get better. And if you do that and you're around other runners, they start asking you, well, what are you learning? And then soon they say, well, give me a workout. And then soon it's build me a training plan. And then all of a sudden they call you coach. So it wasn't like I set out to be a coach. It was more this journey of like, how can I get better? And that
Yeah.
exploration allowed me to help other people get better.
Yeah.
And there's not much better in life than helping others and seeing them through the ups and downs. And the nice thing about running is you have these events where you get this sort of frequent ability to celebrate the hard work that you do. And so it's been a lot of fun over the last 35 years now, I guess.
Wow. Wow. Congrats. I think, Marcos and I get to share the same title with you. I think coach. It's a really important title, but you don't get there because you didn't do the thing, right? You ran yourself. People trusted in you that you're like, wow, this guy is getting better. And you got the education, and then you got into coaching. Tell us, tell the audience and tell us, like, when you took on that mantle of coach, like, you've just been a coach since, or did you work those odd end jobs while you were like in college and getting your master's, or were you like, I was coaching all the time, there was high school track and field or like different things? Was it always just long events of running, like the half marathons and like marathons, or like different events? Like what was it like, kind of trying to get to the professional level as a coach?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I mean, I was state champion in the miles. That, I like the short stuff too. And I could really help a lot of different people. I think because I was studying it from a broad view of how can you get better and what are the sort of physiological and psychological principles that help you no matter what the duration of your event. So during that time, I just kept studying exercise science, and, I worked in a physical therapy clinic, and I wrote a lot as well I had articles in magazines and that sort of thing. And it kind of got to a point where so many people were asking me for help. I was like, well, maybe I can just do this instead of putting on a tie and going to work every day. So it kind of evolved to that. And then soon it grew really fast. And I think part of it was I was a good runner myself, so that's helpful. I had the educational background. And then some of the first athletes I started working with were able to qualify for the Olympic marathon trials or become nationally ranked as a masters or an over 40 athlete at the 5K, for example. So I worked with some of my early athletes that I helped ended up being really fast. And like most things, if you have people that's sort of at the peak, then everybody else thinks you know what you're talking about. So all of a sudden, more people wanted to work with me. So I kind of just fell into a lot of opportunities to work with faster runners and then Olympic development programs, and spent time at the Olympic Training Center, and then had my own professional running team here in Flagstaff, Arizona, a bunch of national championships and world championships and going to the Olympics and stuff like that. So, when you coach at that highest level, then people want to know what you're doing to have that success, and it kind of filters down. And then all of a sudden you grow a large group of sort of us everyday runners that are out there trying to get out from behind the computer and maybe finish your first 5K or improve a half marathon like you did, or qualify for Boston, which is a big deal for a lot of marathoners. So and I also got to be around some of the world's greatest coaches in the history of coaching just by happenstance, where I would get to tour with them or I'd get to spend time with them. And they really took me under their wing. And that gave me a leg up, because experience is super valuable, but the only way you get experience is to do it for a long time. But the more you're around people that have done it before, it shortcuts that process. So I was also lucky to be around a lot of great physiologists and coaches that kind of gave me a leg up too.
With people that are, like you just said, you kind of described different sects of athletes. And obviously, I mean, like you said, getting to Boston, and that one's a qualified race, correct? Like you have to do something preliminary to get there. Okay.
That's right.
What's the qualifying time for Boston?
It depends on your age and gender.
Okay.
So they have different, times you have to run to qualify based on those things. So there's a whole bunch of qualifying times, but it's all related to your gender and age.
Do they, is it like every 5 years that it cuts time off, or is it like every year?
No, it's getting more and more challenging. So every now and then they will adjust the qualifying standards. And just because you meet the standard does not mean you get in the race, because they begin to let people in who have met it by more amounts of time. They get the first chance to register. And then as you get closer to the qualifying standard, you get an opportunity to register. So usually you have to run 3, 4, or 5 minutes faster than the qualifying standard to actually get in and run the race. So it's kind of like two things. Not only do you have to get the qualifying standard, but you probably have to run faster than it to actually get in and run the race. So it can be tough for athletes chasing that standard.
So 3, 4, or 5 minutes, what is that in terms of like pace time in a marathon? Like, is it 5 seconds per mile?
Yeah, it can be that. It can be a minute. I mean, it can be, for some athletes, when you're right on the edge, that 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 15 seconds per mile, that's a big deal, right? When you're trying to do that for 26.2 miles.
So obviously, like, I've not run a marathon. I've helped people prep fueling strategies for it a few times. I remember one of my clients, I think it was just the Dallas Marathon. I'm trying to remember. Was it during COVID? Did she end up doing it? Well, now I'm feeling old. Now my memory's going down. I remember we got started into this, and obviously as her mileage went up, so did her food, and her weight actually was going down. Fun fact for everybody listening: hey, like, you probably need to be eating more to fuel the amount of activity that you weren't doing previously that you now are. So we were talking pace here, right? Like, is it that people are really sustaining within like that threshold of like 5 seconds, 10 seconds at their pace? Or do you, I guess, like, this is probably more of like a question per athlete, but some athletes, I take it, maybe start slow and get faster, or some start faster and know they're going to kind of fall out a little bit, and then they're trying to play like damage control. That's me when it comes to running. But like, how does that go into planning on how to go and do an event that is like kind of like, we'll call it high stress, or like qualifying for?
Yeah, it's a big deal to really dial in your pacing. And of course, in my system, we do a lot of goal pace workout sequences. So across the training, you gradually introduce more and more running at that goal pace. And in the marathon, an even split, meaning you're kind of running the first half and the second half at the same pace
Yeah.
is ideal, or even slightly slower the first half and then faster the second half works really well. So you have to teach the athlete how to control themselves, because marathon pace is not difficult when you start the marathon. That's not the big challenge. It's not heavy breathing. You're not really stressed. It's just that you have to keep doing it for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours.
Yeah.
And that becomes really challenging. So you're trying to get the athlete to where goal pace is really dialed in so they can find it and hold it. And then they have the ability to hold it in race-like conditions. And then their body and their mind has to be able to withstand the ever-increasing fatigue that will happen across the marathon. And you've got to fuel while doing that. So you got to keep the brain happy. You got to keep the gut happy. You got to keep your legs happy. And you've got to not have a pity party so you can keep moving forward to achieve that time. So it really is a very challenging event, which I think is why if you go to the finish line, you'll see people weeping as they finish because they put in all this work and it's this big deal to like, oh my gosh, I did it. So it's really rewarding to train people for that distance.
Can I be real? I did one marathon and I think that's it for me.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I did one and I messed up. So this is back in the CrossFit days where the Reeboks were coming out. And I was like, I'm going to do a minimal shoe. Started training, got some Reebok Nanos 2s. And I was like, these should be good enough. Started breaking them in, but I don't think I broke them in perfectly. By mile 13, I think my right heel, like the cord, like was so messed up that I like had to walk the last few miles. And I feel like we would have probably DNF'd on time. I think we were hitting like this, it was for like the OC marathon. It was like 6 hours and I was like coming close to it and I was trying to limp my way through. There is so much that it comes to preparing for a marathon. Like it's one of those things where people are like, oh, don't you just run? I'm like, no, you need the right shoes. You need the right fueling strategy. You need the right terrain to train on. And there's like a lot of conditions because it's kind of weird. So I live in SoCal, Greg. I'm not so sure if you've been out here, but in Pasadena, there's the Rose Bowl. Mm-hmm. And I run the Rose Bowl loop for like laps. And I have like 11 miles in a few days to run. And it is so easy when you know the course and terrain that you're doing and you just run it all the time because it's like, oh, it's just the same thing. And I think when you talk about the mind training, 11 miles for me, maybe earlier this year, I've done a few half marathons. I'm running through the same running program again, just going faster. Earlier this year, I've been like, oh man, I gotta run 11 miles. This time I'm like, yeah, that's cool. It's just like 3 laps, like whatever. The mind has to like expand to accept the idea that like, oh, you're running more mileage. It is 26.2 though is still a tough idea. I feel like a half marathon is kind of like an athletic pursuit for me that I'm like 90 minutes to 2 hours. Sure. I'll run with some buddies, but 26.2, I feel like is just, if you're not truly trained for that, you are literally tearing your body apart. And I just can't wait for the race to end.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I like the half marathon for most people because it is more approachable. I think you get the same sensations of being really proud of yourself, but you're not beat up as much and the training doesn't require as much as the marathon. But any running event, anything where you're really challenging yourself, it is a combination, isn't it? It's like all of these things have to come together and you're working on that for weeks and weeks and weeks to condition your body, to condition your nutrition, to condition your mind for what you're trying to do. And that is a fun process because you will consistently be achieving something that you couldn't do before. Yeah. And I think that's the fun of training for a big event is that you do get to go up against what before seemed an impossible task. And now, like you say, when you first started running, to run 11 miles, that's impossible, right? That's just, it's so far out there. But over time, you are able to build up to it. Your body gets better and you're able to handle it, but also your mind, right? Your brain doesn't get threatened anymore with the thought of running for an hour, 2 hours. That's not threatening to it. Whereas in the beginning, it didn't like that so much. So it sent a lot of fatiguing messages. So I think that's the fun part of anytime you set this goal out there that is challenging for you, is you get to go through this building process of physical and mental. And, you know, the whole purpose is to become a better person, to achieve something that makes you feel proud and achieves whatever goals you had set. And as a coach, that's fun to work with people who are trying to do that. I coach hundreds of athletes that, you know, they're balancing training with work and family and all these things. So you know what they're putting into it to go into this event and try to accomplish their goals. So it's a lot of fun.
It is, yeah. Marcus, I'll let you ask your question.
So, all right. Well, I have a question for you, Seamus, since we're talking about this. Gun to your head. I need you to run a sub 4-hour marathon. Can you do it right now?
I'm gonna be really honest with you. Maybe because I ran a 148, like a 148, like 49 to 151 half. If I could just keep that up, right, Greg? Like I should be
Yeah.
sub 4.
Yeah, that predicts you could if you were trained for the marathon, you could definitely do it.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'll be real with you though, Marcos. I'll be real with you. After the half marathon though, if you told me to go do that again, I'm telling you, no, not right now. Because Marcos, I'm kind of like the athlete where like the first few miles I'm just kind of like getting into it. So I did the Long Beach half earlier, or the OC, one of the OC has whatever. Greg, this one, the last 3 miles was just a straight runway, and I was like, let's go. The last 3 miles I was just gunning it. I felt like I was just on another level. I hit like another flow state, and I was like, let's go, and it was just like running fast. But then we had like a faster time.
So I don't know if anybody, you may know this, Greg, the origin of the marathon. Did anybody ever like say how long the first person to run the marathon actually took?
We don't know how long it took, but we know the distance was not 26.2 miles. It was more around 20 miles. But in the when the modern Olympic Games started at the end of the 1800s. And so the marathon distance was not consistent. Each marathon was kind of a different distance. It just meant a long run, really. But then I think it was the 1904 Olympics were in London, and the Queen wanted the race to finish in front of her box at the stadium. And so that ended up increasing the distance to 26.2 miles. Used to be more around 25 miles for a lot of them. And so that then became the official distance of a marathon. So from Phidippides, who was the runner who ran from the plains of Marathon to Athens, all that story, that was not as long as it is now. It was really from the Queen of England wanting the race to finish in front of her box. So if you get really tired at the end of a marathon, you can blame it on the Queen of England for making it 6.2 miles instead of a little bit shorter. So that's kind of become now the standard. If you say I ran a marathon, that is
we have
outside of that is a different distance.
Yeah, because I was wondering if it was rooted in that, or where the actual why 26.2. It felt like it would tie to like just the story at large, but the fact that you're saying she wanted it to be more spectator friendly for the Olympics makes a ton of sense. Like, hey, I want to see them finish, and I don't want to move my rump,
That's right.
But it's funny though, because Seamus, I ask you that question, and then I think about the CrossFit Games circa during COVID. It may have been 2020, or maybe slightly before, where they go back to the ranch and everybody like runs, and then Dave Castro comes up. He's like, all right, now do it again. Like go backwards. And everybody's like, yeah, get out of here. And he's like, no, seriously, like that's the event. Go do it again, but the other direction. Everybody was like, oh my God. Like I thought I was like, light at the end of the tunnel and about to, put on the jets, and then they had to turn around and do it again.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm bringing this up because I know you wrote some books, right, Greg?
Yes.
And you're talking a lot about psychology right now with us. And obviously I feel like I haven't read either of them, I'm going to be honest, but I'm assuming there's quite a good deal of the psychology of the sport, in there. So that like those pre-race jitters and anxiety, I think that's something that you talk about managing appropriately. And then like the mental emotional preparation, all those things, like those are the things that really fascinate me. And I would love to dive into those a little bit deeper about like, again, like you said, you probably want to come out the gate hot, but you're also like, I'm gonna be here for a few hours, right? Like I gotta like be with him. Like because I know how I feel when I'm doing like a CrossFit event, like heart rate's ticking. I know how I felt during High Rocks. It's just like, all right, like we're about to get going. And then we hit like 12 minutes in, and it was kind of a wall. I was like, God dang, the sled push really just.
I told you, bro. I told you.
The sled push made me feel some type of way, and that was with a partner. So I was like, all right, well, I guess this is different. I gotta keep going. So I guess my particular question here is like, when it comes to tailoring the mind and also tailoring the program in those final weeks getting ready, like what are you telling people to focus on?
Yeah, we do a lot of managing of the mind, particularly as the event nears, because you're tapering down your training, right? So you do this reduction in training over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So you're able to freshen up and rebuild your energy stores and those kinds of things. But that means you're training less and the event is getting close. Very dangerous place for the mind. You know, our lizard brain likes to focus on the negative, what could happen. It lives with a lot of the doubts and fears. And so a lot of my job is to distract the athlete so we focus on the positive. I have them build what I call an awesomeness journal, which is you should be writing down all the great things you have done in your training to get ready. Sometimes that's just getting out the door. That was a huge victory. That can be something you can lean on. Sometimes it's you ran faster or farther than you had done before. So what I'm doing in that last little bit is having them focus on the positive, because I know their brain, left unattended, will start saying, did I do enough? Can I do this? Why am I doing this? I don't feel ready. What if I don't succeed? What are people going to think? I mean, there's this whole sort of path that athletes can go down, and probably everybody when you have something really challenging in front of you. So we know from psychology that the lizard brain will try to tell you can't do it, and you need to live more. And you've proven it to yourself in training. You are grateful for the opportunity and you want to challenge yourself. That's why you started doing it anyway. And so you live more in that period. So I give them a lot of workouts that they like, that they've been successful with. And we try to live a lot in the past successes so then they can go into the race a little bit calmer. Yeah. And obviously we do a lot of logistical stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be on automatic pilot going into a race. You know what you're going to eat the day or two before. You know exactly what you're going to wear. You know how you're going to think across the race. You know how you're going to pace yourself. You know you're going to be ready to compete in the go zone where you really need to push. All of those things have been practiced in training. And so hopefully by the time you get to the race, you're sort of automatic pilot from your peak performance mindset.
I love that.
Yeah. The deloading of it's such an interesting concept across like every area of sport that has like this, peak week, right? Or the peaking for the event. Like to me, I mean, who was the first person to be like, you know what, makes sense. I'm gonna take 2 weeks to just do less before going and hitting like the all out effort. That alone, like I've always struggled with peaking.
People do. It's not normal, right? Because you spend all this time being so routine. I mean, most of us that are involved in athletics, we're on a routine. Like we have this set schedule and we're sort of working out at the same time, the same number of days. We're doing this whole thing. And then all of a sudden you say, well, take me out of that and remove that. That's why you have to be so careful during that deloading or tapering or peaking phase so that you can understand that you are resting a little bit so you can perform your best. But you need to maintain some semblance of your routine at least and continue to kind of rev. We talk about resting the body, but revving the engine so that you maintain some of your performance. So if you do take too much time off or you taper too quickly or too much, you will feel flat. It takes your body out of that sort of rhythm that it's had. So it really can be an art to how much you sort of taper down before a big event. There's a lot of physical components to it and then a lot of mental components. You get it right and then you're so fresh going into the event, you really can, see your true fitness. Because most of the time, your true fitness is somewhat covered over by this ongoing amounts of fatigue that you have, just sort of lingering. That's sort of how you grow stronger, right? So it is important that you dial in and understand that peaking process.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's so interesting. I think it takes athletes, I think that, like for a more new athlete coming into the space, that conversation is going to take them years to kind of figure themselves out and have that wisdom. Because it took me well into my college years of like wrestling and like doing a lot of combat sports and into running. I took the same mindset. Like I kind of knew what it would feel like with my tapers and all that, even though it's two totally different sports. And I feel that, my fiance would be doing something and I'd be, and I'd be like, no, I'm good. And like, it took me a long time to realize like, I'm good are like really powerful words, because a lot of folks are always like, no, we got to do more. And I'm like, no, I'm good. It's something I've realized in my training because injuries or overdoing it, it's always happened when you're like, no, I don't think I did enough. And you do some extra reps, you do some extra things. And it's like at the end of a training session, you're fatigued, you're tired, and now you got hurt, or like now you're dealing with a nagging thing. And it's so funny how, like, for example, your training plans and the pacing, I just stuck with them. And even though you may not feel the progress is happening in the moment, when they came to race day, I was like, I feel good. Let's lock in, like everything, all engines were go, everything was good. And I think that is so important to realize when you need to go and when you have to rev, as opposed to always just going all the time. I think that mind, especially an athlete's mind, it's always just kind of going. You got to figure out other ways to, kind of like you said, distract yourself. I think that's why, Marcos, and I like to do some speed cubing. I think that's why as an athlete, I just always had a issue with me, because it just kept my mind off the everything else I had to do.
Yeah, it becomes a problem because we're kind of, confidence is always fragile. And so there's a lot of, I need to prove it. If I do more, it's better. And so there's a lot of times where athletes are doing that, where they feel like they need to prove it to themselves. But fitness development, ultimately, when it's done correctly, it sneaks up on you, right? You should feel that you're not having to kill yourself in training to get fit. It should be more like, I'm just keeping going. I'm just getting in my workouts, and then all of a sudden 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks go by and you just start to get better, and it kind of sneaks up on you. I always feel like when athletes are training in that perfect zone where their stress and their rest is balanced, like you said, it's not that everything's hard all the time. It's just that you're just getting it in.
Yeah.
And then slowly it just sneaks up on you that you're really fit. And mostly that's because you're making a new you. And that takes time, because the you at the end of your training cycle is a different person than the you at the beginning. So if you're going to make a new you, that doesn't happen overnight. That comes from repetition over and over and over again, and stacking successful week on top of successful week. So my whole thing is train this week so you can train next week. If you do anything stupid this week, then you're going to screw up next week. And we need to compound this training. We need to get it to where it's week after week. So in a lot of the times, athletes that are new to my training system, they're like, I could do more. I said, I know you can, but let's do this for 4 weeks. And then let's talk about doing more. So, kind of being patient is critical, no matter what type of training you're doing. So I feel like it is working hard, but it's got to be this idea that I'm going to be better in a month. I'm going to be better in the next month. I'm going to be better at the end of this training cycle. And then I'm going to be better next year, because then you can be a really different you. And, you guys know how it is. If you put 2 or 3 years together of training, you are a completely different person. You can really radically change yourself. It just takes a little time and patience. And that's something for most of us that are driven athletes is, it's tough to do.
I talked to Marcos about this because I'm transitioning from, I've transitioned now. It's been like 2 or 3 years, but my identity doesn't allow me to think like that. I've spent like 20 years grappling, and it was 2-3 years ago that me and my fiance started getting ready for a half. And I've done some other halves and like Spartan races and stuff like that. They're like, okay, that was just kind of like to fill up the time until I was ready to do jiu-jitsu again, because I had like some skin stuff. And I just kind of got used to it. And then Marcos and I had a conversation. I did the high rocks twice. And high rocks might be something that you might have heard of recently, Greg. Like the high rocks is kind of getting up there with these hybrid athletes. And I kind of talked with Marcos. I was like, yeah, I think if I just give myself like until I'm 35, my VO2, my running capacity, all the technique stuff, like I probably might be up there with like, not necessarily the top 15, but like I could be up there as a person in these things.
It takes a while, that's for sure. You got to build yourself over time. That's why if you look at the Olympics, for example, most of the endurance athletes, they usually have put in 15 years or so of training before they reach their peak. So swimmers usually are in their early 20s because they start swimming, when they're 5 or 6, and they're part of that. You can look at East Africans who are really good in distance running. They're usually in their mid-20s. That's because they were running back and forth to school. For our athletes, it's usually later 20s, early 30s where they start to really find. And so it's kind of this 15-year of training, or that 10,000 hours idea, right? You just have to put it in. So a lot of what I'm talking with athletes about is let's just find a routine that we can be consistent with, that can fit into your life, that has enough wiggle room when life gets in the way, because it will, and that you can feel like you're making progress, because we need to do this this needs to be a lifestyle for you. If it becomes a lifestyle, then you really will reap all of the rewards from your sport, which is what you're talking about. You just need to become that person over time.
Identity is huge. And I think that's part of the modern problem is just like identity struggles, right? A lot of people I try to coach more specifically are, men that used to be, or quote unquote, used to be athletes in their head and want to get back to it, right? And I resonate with that because I feel like I'm perpetually there. Like, I don't know where I'm gonna put my attention, so I'm like, I'm just gonna stick to this. Like, and then I want to keep myself in good enough shape to be able to be like, hey, someone says we want to do more running for our training. I was like, all right, I feel like my general fitness level is prepared enough to be able to go do that. And I was like, all right, cool. Greg, if you would have told me a year ago, like if it was April of last year, and I would have been like, my buddy's going to come up and say, hey, we're going to start running, upwards of 12 miles a week, I'd have been like, nah, not a shot. There ain't no way that's going to happen, And then here I was like, basically skipping a leg day, everyone's favorite thing to do, and running instead, only for my legs to feel even worse than when I do leg days for whatever reason. But I think, with like, we're getting into modernity now, right? Like, so I don't know the specifics of your program and how exactly you coach. Seamus is really key on tracking metrics, whether it's like with the watch or this other app. We had a CEO and co-founder on this app called Hybrid, where it's looking at how you rank in different percentiles, right? Based on age, height. No, was it age, height, weight? No, age, sex, weight. Or age, sex, weight.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically you have like the 5 different like facets of running. I believe it was like a 400, a mile, 5K, a half marathon, and a marathon. So it's like a very broad spectrum in that kind of like, those domains. And then over on like the strength component side, they had like squat, bench, dead. I think it was a shoulder press. And Seamus, you remember what the 5th movement may have been strength wise? Pull-ups maybe?
Pull move.
Or a dip? Yeah, I don't know. You have the app. You could pull it up.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. So it's like a spider chart or like a radar chart. And yeah, so it's marathon, half marathon, 10K, 5K, 1 mile, overhead press, barbell row, deadlift, bench, and squat.
There we go.
But these scores are going to change. So they're looking at it as more like, so for the squat, bench, deadlift, barbell row, overhead press, from like an exercise physiology standpoint, they're like, those are just human movements. They were like, what about qualities, muscular power, muscular strength, muscular endurance, muscular isometric, and then like some other things. I think he's changing that later on, which makes more sense because it's like you can put all those movements into those categories. Like what's your squat power, bench power, or something like that.
Yeah, but I think it just for the sake of like more people have access to get more raw data, they probably went that way. But anyway, data is kind of driving the world. We've had a lot of conversations. Here we go. We're going to talk about AI again. We've had a lot of conversations about AI and the ability to extrapolate and look at data. And then are there like data driven tools, heart rate monitors, GPS tools, and other technology integrations that, you're into coaching versus like kind of the intuitive sense at this point in the game?
Yeah, I come from the idea that the data is supposed to help you. Mm-hmm. And needs to be understood as its value when it's provided. So one of the challenges we have is that every run can be evaluated on your VO2 max, for example. But VO2 max, what you want is it to fluctuate based on what event you're getting ready for. And it also builds over time and can come and go depending on your training. So the challenge that I have is explaining, is this data important that we can collect? Do we care about it right now? And do we want to change it or need to change it? Because sometimes, because it is evaluative, then you think, well, everything needs to be higher, right? So everything is judged in that way. But we don't always want it to be that way. So as a coach, you're trying to figure out what's important and what isn't. In fact, I just wrote an article talking about how when I started running, a running watch just recorded the time. So that's all you knew. You just ran for a certain amount of time. You might drive the car on the loop and say, oh, well, this is 5 miles or whatever. But we didn't have this data every day, every run. It was more your trend across your training cycle. So it was more like, oh, well, now 3 weeks later, running that same loop, I'm 30 seconds faster or a minute faster. So it was the trend that we were concerned about and not every data point from every run. So that's the biggest challenge. We started with the ability to collect data, right? We got really good at collecting data. And poor new runners, right? They would show up, get a new watch, and all of a sudden, after every run, it was bam. They were just, oh, your foot strike is this, your ground contact time, your VO2 max. They didn't know how to evaluate
they're on
it, right?
Strava too. And if they're on Strava too, they got to make sure that like they're liking someone's kudos and
It's
making sure they're part of the run club.
It's
And
a lot.
maybe a guy's hitting on them because they're just, in a run club.
It's crazy. And then some of the watches would do an evaluation of the run during the run. Your performance improvement is -4. Well, that sucks. No coach is going to say that on a run. So the point is, we started with the ability to collect all the data. And now I think the scrambling is to figure out what data is important for that athlete at this point for their goal and where they're going.
Yeah.
Because no different if you're doing CrossFit or you're training for racing, you're developing different aspects of your fitness at different times because you're trying to arrive at your event in your best shape. So you're not always going to be the best at everything all the time. And you're going to have downtime. You're going to have after where you're going to recover, which is really important. So some of those data points are going to go down. And that's part of the training process. So we have to connect all this back to training. So I have to do a lot of work to explain what data is important, when, and how should we care about it or not. Experienced runners may have some stuff they should care about more. New runners may have a lot less, right? If I have a new runner, I'm like, let's just get out the door 3 days a week and let's try to do that for 6 weeks. That would be the victory. I don't care what your VO2 max says. I don't care about that stuff. I know establishing the routine is number one. So that's where we are, is trying to take this data overload, analyze it, figure out what's important, make it work for the athlete so that they stay motivated and consistent and become a different person over time. So that's really the big challenge that we have right now.
Oh, yeah.
Marcos, before you go into yours, I agree. I said VO2 max today as part of my clinical test with the patient, and I was like, he's like, can you speak English? I meant, oh, we're going to do a cardiovascular test today, a cardio test, just see how far you can kind of go. And I realized, like, it's so true. People walk in the door and like they get overwhelmed with data of like all this vernacular. Like, am I going to get faster with this or not?
That's it.
Yeah, but I mean, all that was just so well put, and it's things that, again, oh man, this week was a loss for Seamus and myself when it's more like a client seeking weight and fat loss, right? And we're like, oh man, like this week really didn't show any additional progress. And I was like, maybe to you, but like same thing. It's like your time horizon is way too narrow. I would much rather you be pretty dang consistent 80 to 90% of the time over the next 4 to 6 weeks versus you being like, this week sucks, I'm just not going to care this next week. And it's like you put yourself a week behind, which same thing. It's like because of all these tools and data metrics that you can try to pull from, people just get paralyzed with trying to analyze information that they don't really know enough about, And again, for me, it was like I started when we were doing runs, I don't remember. I think, was it this last winter or the previous winter? No, it was last year, kind of in the colder months. I was like testing HRV. I was like, why am I even doing this? Like, I don't know enough about this. I'm not educated enough to even like make a decision. I would do it every morning. I was like, I'm ready at 10. I was like, hell yeah, like good. Like, I was like, I'm not getting any additional value out of this, but like days it told me I was like at 9, I was like, how is it any different than me at a 10? I feel exactly the same. So certain things that can try to analyze and give you some sort of objective feedback at times, like subjectively, you're just like, I'm going to override that a little bit. And like you just said too, how is it going to drive better training decisions in the long run to allow yourself to continue to grow? Actually, like going back to like myself here, like I would not have pictured myself as somebody that would have done as much running in 2024 as I did, but I found some other things out for my headspace, like you're talking about here, that I really started to enjoy. I was like, there's nothing more kind of like centering or clearing than spending 30 to 60 minutes in these kind of like interval type runs that like I'm challenging myself, but like it's that conversation in my head. like you're talking about, like I was starting to enjoy that conversation with myself, trying to figure out like, how am I going to push through? Because the only other time I was typically getting that was in like CrossFit workout, but I'm kind of a few years removed from doing, class setting CrossFit where I'm like struggling hard. So there's certain elements to the mind, and how my body would feel. And overall, I think recoverability got better for things. But like you also mentioned, there were certain elements that were getting better and there were other things that were coming down because not everything can rise up at the same time.
100%.
And I look back after a 90-day block, right, to get ready and then do the event. And I went back and looked at like a DEXA scan, and I was like, I'm surprised. As much work as I put in here, I thought I would hold on to more muscle than I did. I would have thought that I wouldn't have lost much of anything because I try to keep the training stimulus with everything kind of balanced. I didn't try not to overdo it or replace stuff. And it was like, oh no, you gained like 4 or 5 pounds of fat and lost like 5 pounds of lean, right? It like kind of just shifted. And I was like, all right, well, but I'm fitter. Like, again, obviously I can go run better. So it was like, then you have these competing signals like you're talking about, like, hey, I couldn't rise with my aesthetics during this phase, but like my performance shot through the roof. So it's like, did this really take that big of a backseat? To me, yes, but to the average person, they're probably like, you didn't look any different, So
Yeah, and it's a good point because ultimately it needs to come down to what makes you happy, what makes you feel rewarded. And so sometimes, that run that may have been bad by the data was one of the best things you could have done, whether it was clearing your mind or challenging you in a different way. So there's value, right? You're just trying to find the value in it. And ultimately, that's something that's very personal. So you have to experience it to kind of know what that is. And that's why it's always been difficult for runners to explain to non-runners, why in the world are you doing this? This seems horrible. If you ask me to run 1 lap around the track, that seems horrible. I hate it. But as you've talked about, if you do something for a while, you may begin to find whatever it really resonates with you, and it becomes valuable to you, not for the outcome, but for the process. And that's what runners find a lot. That's why people start and the first few runs are horrible and it's awful. But if they keep doing it, suddenly there's something that switches and they do enjoy challenging themselves. They do enjoy the inner dialogue. They do enjoy the peace, the therapy that they get while they're doing it, or they enjoy the people that they're doing it with. That becomes really valuable for them.
Yeah.
So I think we have to realize that in our very technical world, we're still human beings. And there's things that when we put ourselves in situations that are typically physical, we really find ourselves and we find everything else in life gets better when we're doing this physical act. For me, it's moving on my own 2 legs across the earth. And that's a very, that's where I find it. So other people, it's weightlifting. It doesn't matter what it is. But the point is, you need to not dwell on the data so much that you miss that sort of opportunity to connect with yourself.
Yeah.
And speaking to like, again, just different times explaining things, right? Like for people that are coming and maybe grabbing a copy of your books to get better at, a marathon, is there certain elements to the book that also includes like the lifting component, things that help with muscle mass or strength development, or like what does that look like? Like, what is the methodology for you? Because obviously, the best way of getting running takes a lot of time to run 26.2 miles a peak. I don't know how many hours per week that is, but something tells me there's very little time to like maximize any kind of lifting component. But I know in listening to other, coaches that try to blend the two, you got to find a little bit of balance, right?
Yeah, we do a lot of strength and conditioning with athletes. So we do a lot of work that's mobility work, because in running, there's a lot of injuries, and most of that is repetitive use injury. It's no different than somebody working on a, assembly line, doing the same thing over and over. That's what you're doing in running. So mobility work is key so that you avoid dysfunction and you can find problem areas, because they usually get tight first. That's usually what the body does. It tries to guard. And then we do a lot of strength and core and balance work, not so much for building muscle, but more to make sure the muscle stays operating correctly and can grow stronger to handle the specific stresses that you're putting on it, right? And so the body's always trying to be efficient at what you're trying to ask it to do. So a lot of our strength and conditioning work is not to build muscle, because that's tough to do while you're training for a marathon for sure. But a lot of it is to be a healthy athlete so that you can then handle the run training that you're going to do. It does become a big challenge when you have someone who wants to build muscle and become an endurance runner. Those two things are really hard to balance doing at the same time. Again, because the body's like, okay, I will do these things to help me build muscle, but those counteract what you're trying to do when you're running, which is try to have a big engine and a little body. So it's kind of a challenge. And like you said, that comes with just an acceptance of the compromises that you may have, right? So running provides certain things, strength training provides certain things, and you're going to have a compromise of if you're trying to combine both of them.
Yeah. And there's so many athletes out there that are, again, like that's like they're running marathons at levels that are, again, qualifying, times. Some of them in jeans and then breaking the amount of pull-ups done in 24 hours.
You know that guy? That guy's crazy.
I know. So, and again, it's like, man, that'd be really cool to be looking like that and then also running in jeans and like just killing it, like, but again, like I know that like those are very special individuals, the Nick Bear, and I think that's his last name is Truest of the world, right? So
yeah, they're outliers.
They're outliers.
That's what you have to be careful with too, right? You guys were talking about social media and all of that. You have to be very careful with comparisons now, because extremism, if you have somebody who's genetically something, or they've been training forever, they don't have your lifestyle, you need to be careful when comparing, right? I have to do that as a coach, right? I've coached Olympians, but I don't give the same training plan to a new runner. Those are two different people and they're different spots, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful with comparisons.
But Greg, it's so captivating, social media. The guy looks good. He ran a good time. Buy his program. Like, I'm going to look like him in 12 weeks.
I know.
And in his defense, I don't think he's pushing programs. I think he's out there telling people, hey, to do what I'm doing is very unique.
Yeah.
This is more of like, that's cool. Like,
it's cool.
Inspiration is great, right?
Yeah.
Inspiration and motivation are really key to keep going. So whatever works for you that way is important.
I think me at 18 having social media where it's at now versus me at 31 would be a much different picture, and granted, social media was really coming up, and for me, it was like Noah Olson was the athlete that I'm like, him and Alex Smith at the time were kind of blowing up on social media and Instagram during the CrossFit heyday. And I was like, these guys are like basically my age. They both look really good. They're really effing strong and they're really effing fit. And I'm like, man, I was
too.
just, in all domains, and I'm pretty sure that, Noah worked with like Chris Henshaw and like worked on the running stuff. And so, again, they basically sussed out how to, again, get the personalized plan to get numbers of squatting the 4 plates and running these things and doing it in conjunction and, peaking at the right time. Mm-hmm. And also too, it was just like, again, like, I'm like, man, I really feel like it'd be cool to try to like strive to get there. And then when it never did, I'm like, man, I'm never mad that I didn't give a fair shake to those things. But like you just said, it's like, did I take on too much too soon and cause an injury that may have been a setback that didn't allow for the right peaking? I had a shoulder injury because I tried to outlift somebody that was significantly stronger than me because I was a little bit better at that particular lift than him, and I was like, I'm still hurting from it 10 years later. So, overuse injuries and all the stuff you're talking about and mitigation and the mind, like we've been discussing, is, super important. And, my hat's off to you to be able to be like, hey, you're the new guy. You're not going to be the Olympian, but not to say that you couldn't be, but at this time you're not to that level. James, I have one more question for him, then I'll let you kind of get the last one here for sake of time. But the other thing that's trending right now are these ultra marathon distances. Mm-hmm. What do you think about those? Because I think that's like, I don't know. Someone
didn't they just do the 100
Moab
LA to
Moab 240 miles. So we're going to 10x the amount of mileage that you're doing on a normal marathon. Just do 10 of them and then just sleep and whatever. What are your thoughts about that? And have you had anybody reach out to you to help with those type of training plans?
Oh yeah, we work with a ton of ultra runners, trail runners, very successfully. So it's like everything. People enjoy challenging themselves and they like to compete, right? And so you get two people, they're going to compete in something. And after you've done a marathon, some people are like, that's not long enough. I want to keep going. And so then
Really?
it's like, well, if you can do 100 miles, what about 150 miles? Well, what about 250 miles? Well, let's do Badwater, where you start at Death Valley in the middle of the day in the summer. Let's just, so there's always this.
We had the first Filipino person do that on our pod as well.
Oh yeah.
Ben, he works out at my gym, and he like graced us with his time, and I was like, he rolled his ankle like 1/3 of the way in and then ran it, and I was like, are you?
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's just a different mindset.
It's a totally different mind. You have to be wired in the right way to be successful. And this applies to everything. If you want to be an 800-meter runner or a miler, you have to be wired a certain way for that. The same thing with ultra distances. You have to be wired in that way. But it's fascinating because it is hours and hours of time where you're in your own head. I mean, a lot of times you're by yourself in the middle of the night. Nobody's around you for hours. I mean, it takes a special ability to be able to be successful in those events.
When we had him on, Marcos, I think you might have missed that one, but
I missed it.
I asked him, I was like, so like, did you have like a podcast on? Did you have like music on? He's like, no, I was just in my head. I was like, what were you doing? So he's an engineer for the city of Los Angeles, and like was a engineer and like a consult for like building like big things. He's like, I was going through problems in my head. I was like, that's probably like the best time to go through it.
100%. Phone's not ringing, no emails coming in. He could get his work done.
All the deep work out in the deserts of 135 miles later.
Yeah. It's really neat. I've been to a bunch of them. I've crewed a bunch of them. I think it's just a different thing. The one thing I will say is there's a lot of camaraderie because everybody is going through the same stuff. It doesn't matter if you're at the front of the pack, the middle, or the back. There's a lot of respect for that you did what you did. And it's a big community. I think that's the community part of ultra running is a big part of it because it is really tight-knit and very respectful.
Yeah. And I think the big thing you keep touching on is like the human desire to like challenge the mind in ways that people are like, that seems treacherous. Hell, that's how Mr. Beast makes a living. It's like, I'm going to put myself in solitary confinement for 7 days and see what happens to me. And people are like, what did happen to him? If you record it and have a story behind it, it's like, it ends up being like this amazing feat. I mean, there was a guy, the guy that won the Moab was on a podcast and was discussing like, dude, I think he was like 15 miles behind the leader and he was in second place and he overcame that and won the event. He's like, in the moment, he's like, I'm just going to go do me. And it's like, yeah, but like he's like, I literally looked up, got my like the GPS signal of that person out and I knew where he was. Like you just said, I could have quit right there, but he's like, I just got to keep going. I don't know what's going to like the fact that like, you never know what's going to happen to a competitor in the event. Like, especially if it is as long as that, like it's kind of crazy to think about. And I was listening to that story today. I'm like, that's wild to make up basically like a marathon's worth of distance.
Yeah. Right.
And just slow, but like you just said, it's like that journey. He literally had this like kind of hero's journey amidst this long duration run and takes special people. And I was getting inspired by it. I was like, not inspired enough to run something like that, but I've had particular events. James, you're going to do this with me. You don't know yet. We're going to do our 100K walkathon, 100K steps in a day, and I think that ends up equating to I don't know, maybe 2 marathons worth of distance. No idea. We'll figure it out when we get there.
Well, that's one of
I got a few movies I need to line up on the treadmill. So.
No.
Well, to your point, I feel like one of the things that really got me with running was I really enjoyed when the world came down to me versus me. I really found value in sort of when I was racing hard and it was challenging and essentially it was just me versus me, obviously competing with other people, but it was really me making those decisions and how good you feel when you go through that and come out the other side. So all of these experiences, that's what people are searching for. I think that's the value we find in being athletic.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it's funny when you tell someone like, oh, I'm gonna run a marathon. It's like, oh, you're trying to go for first? It's like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? I'm running to like try to beat myself. They're
Yeah.
like, why would you do a race if you're not trying to win? Well, look, Greg, this has been phenomenal. I know we're going over an hour here. I want to be respectful of your time and everyone's time here, and it's been a great podcast episode. What's coming up for you next? After this call, I think you're literally packing your bags and you're off to some big things. What's going on with you, and where can people find you?
Yeah, heading to Boston for the marathon a week from Monday, and then I'll go to London for the marathon the weekend after that. So every weekend there's a lot of people racing, so that's a lot of fun. And McMillanRunning.com is the website. Basically offer individualized training for runners. That's kind of an all-inclusive program that helps them try to achieve their goals, and I really enjoy doing it.
Awesome. One last question. So for first-time marathoners that are picking up your book, joining your program, whatever it might be, what's one piece of advice you hope sticks for them, with them, as they are looking to calm their nerves and run their best race?
Yeah, I think it's coming back to reminding yourself that you probably overcame a bunch of challenges over the few weeks going into it. And that practice is what you will get to put into practice in the marathon. So all the skills that you learn to, overcome those challenges, that's what you'll lean on as you get into those later miles of the marathon.
Awesome. Well said. Well, Greg, again, thank you for your time. We'll have everything listed in the show notes so people can go find you. I know it seems like Seamus already found you. You use a free resource, right, Seamus? Like
I use a free resource, and it's been doing it for 2 years. I used the Chris Henshaw's aerobic capacity program, Greg. I found his program like listening, and then I've been trying to get him on the pod too. But I just looked up like, what are my paces? I had no understanding of like what the heck is a pace. Like, what am I doing? What does that even mean? And I've been using your stuff for like 2 years. So yeah,
that's great.
So
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So everybody, you got books you can check out. I think you have 3 or more. I think I count at least 3, unless it's 5. The 5 behind you were all yours.
A bunch of them back there. Yep.
My goodness. Okay. So you got a wealth of knowledge that you can pick up from a book. You have online calculators. You have the actual one-to-one programs with Greg. Go find them with the links that we were providing here. And again, just thank you for your time. And until next time, everybody, hopefully you got a ton of value. You're focusing on running this year. Get yourselves a good coach, someone that's been doing it for a while like Greg. So appreciate it. Thanks, guys.